Kia ora. For the past 2 decades, there's been a new old kid developing on the progressive religion bloc. It's a movement called Religious Naturalism, or RN for short. While it may be new to many, it has a long pedigree, stretching from Christian medieval times to today. Its pedigree reaches back even more centuries, if we take into consideration indigenous peoples' nature-centric spirituality, like Māori spirituality that refers to Papatūānuku, the Earth Mother. Its resurgence has been helped by the establishment in 2014 of the RN Association, with over 550 members. An important marker in the recent history of religious naturalism was the lecture given in 1966 by Glynn, then Professor of Medieval History at Princeton, on the historical roots of our ecological crisis. In that lecture, White argued 3 things. Firstly, that the Bible asserts humanity's dominion over nature and establishes a trend of anthropomorphism, that is, God is like a superhuman. Secondly, Christianity makes a distinction between humanity, formed in God's image, and the rest of creation, which has no soul and is thus inferior. And thirdly, he argues that Orthodox Christian teaching has thus tended to empty the biosphere of any sense of God's presence in natural things, and open the way for Christianity to exploit rapaciously natural objects as it desired, and also to denigrate and destroy religious, often indigenous traditions that have a high regard for nature. So White concludes that the ecological crisis, global warming, ozone depletion, deforestation, etc., is fundamentally a spiritual crisis. And it's hard to fault his argument. And this lecture was given 54 years ago. Religious naturalism has a threefold foundation. Firstly, has a commitment to humans as enmeshed in nature. The human story and the universe story are the same story. We're not encapsulated, separated, isolated beings. We are fully linked with our surroundings in time and space and matter and energy. And where the metaphor of the web is used to describe this interrelatedness, we create the web and the web creates us. Within the relational web, we are also self-creative and therefore transform the web for better or for worse. As earth creatures, we truly do exist in a web, a network, a maze from which there is no escape. Wherever we are in the universe, when we look up in the night sky and wonder at the awesome beauty of the universe, we're actually the universe reflecting on itself. The second foundation of religious naturalism is that there is nothing other than what is natural causing events in the world. In religious naturalism, the scientific grand story of nature, different from the biblical story and not founded on revelation, but on carefully formulated theory, provides a framework for understanding what we accept as real. A central narrative, the epic of evolution, explains that everything in the cosmos shares a common heritage, and everything is interconnected, including us humans. We not only depend on and influence nature, we are a part of it. D.M. Braxton writes, "To wrap one's mind around the immensities of time and space is to feel awe, wonder, and humility. To see how a small planet, adrift in space, could have nurtured in its bosom the grand experiment that is life, is to peek into Darwin's mystery of mysteries. Evolution outlines the grand arc of cosmic events. It forms the incredible journey the world has undergone, such that we improbable creatures could emerge. It informs us of the grounds of our ecological citizenship. The third and final foundation of religious naturalism is an appreciation of religion with a view that nature can be a focus of religious attention. The religious orientation of RN encompasses spiritual responses that include feelings of appreciation, gratitude, humility, reverence, and joy at the wonder of being alive. Such wonder and awe are deeply spiritual. So as a spiritual path, RN decentralizes the human species within the broader metaphysical and aesthetic rhythms of the universe. It is a path of humility. Religious naturalism is also a way that reveres the wisdom of collective human experience and reason more highly than any sacred book or tradition. Religious naturalism is a quest for wisdom for wherever it may be found, from other faiths, from literature and art, from indigenous wisdom, from science. In our first reading today by Wendell Berry, we heard him tell of him experiencing the ministry of birds and bush and water, finding peace, as we might. Finding peace not from the intervention of a supernatural being, but through the ministrations of nature. Jerome Stone writes, "There's no good reason to believe that taking nature to heart leaves a person with any fewer spiritual benefits than taking to heart the teachings of supernaturalist traditions. If we can go to special places built by humans, which are designated as sacred, surely we can go to special places shaped naturally that we recognize as sacred." There is a strong monotheistic tradition of cutting down the sacred groves. What we need to realize is that to have a sense of sacred is not tree worship, but is rather the acknowledgement of the awesome, the overriding, and the overwhelming. Nature is constitutive of who and what we are as human beings. As I said, we're not encapsulated, isolated beings. Wherever we are, the universe is. The history of the universe is our history. We are all recycled stardust. Ursula Goodenough writes, "That we possess an aesthetic for the natural is affirmed by taking a young child for a walk in the woods or by the sea and witnessing her innate delight in all she beholds. The delight has little to do with sunsets or vistas, with order or pattern or purpose. The delight is with the particular, the ladybug crawling on the rock, the fuzzy moss, the tickly dune grass, the mucky mud by the river. Children connect with the immediate and become a part of it. The mud isn't messy, or rather its messiness is what makes it wonderful. Children are inherently attuned to nature." Our second reading this morning from Isaiah 55 has God conceived in a traditional Jewish Christian way of being separate from the natural world, though it is a noteworthy piece for the anthropomorphism, the human-like features it gives to the mountains and the hills. They are singing, and the trees of the field clapping their hands. Religious naturalists, generally speaking, conceive of God in 4 different types of ways. Firstly, the totality of the universe considered naturally. This is also called pantheism. The totality of the universe considered religiously, called pantheism. Then they conceive of God as the creative process, the impulse within the universe. Thirdly, the sum of human ideals. Of course, that is well known to us as Lloyd Gering's viewpoint. Or fourth, those who see no need to use the concept of terminology of God at all, but consider themselves religious or spiritual. Whatever the difference between these 4 perspectives, naturalists agree on the rejection of the concept of the God who actively alters the course of natural events via episodic interventions, or acts as some kind of personal chaplain. But the question of the existence of God is far from settled. Speaking personally, how I conceive of God is different from, though with some similarities to, those 4 positions mentioned. But I have a lot of empathy and political and intellectual convergence with RN and how it's trying to recenter spirituality in the here and now, in the wonders of life and the environment in which we are intertwined, and calling attention to the pressing need to aid in the healing of our planet. As for Jesus, religious naturalism sees him as one who is able, via oral storytelling, to set people free from images and ideas and religious practices that bound people into a fear and a false sense of separation from the spirit of all life, which of course does not make him supernatural or divine or the second person of the Trinity, just human, wonderfully, gloriously human. As the Catholic feminist theologian Elizabeth Johnson says of him, born of a woman and the Hebrew gene pool, he was a creature of the earth, a complex unit of minerals and fluids, an item in the carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen cycles, a moment in the biological evolution of the planet. Like all human beings, he carried within himself the signature of the supernovas and the geology and life history of the earth. Again, personally speaking, similar to RN's thinking about God, I have much empathy. But Jesus, I think, was more than just an iconoclast, a liberator from practices that bound people into fear. I think he lived and preached a way that involved hospitality, compassion, and justice. And he preached that to friends, people who are marginalized, even to enemies. This was a political, social, economic, and spiritual vision. It was a vision of belonging to each other, and from a religious naturalist perspective, a way of belonging to the earth community. Blessings to you this week.